Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is Valerie Dragon. I'm one of the Director of Instructional Support at the Instruction Partners team. And all that really means is my phone is really busy, really just ringing a lot these days. You all have tough work ahead of you. We have to plan for reentry. Never fear, there is a tool that I want you to check out with me. So the tool that we're presenting is called the Reentry Framework. Again, we've learned through our partners that whatever we develop as thinking, as soon as we put it on paper, they want to use it. They want to figure out a way to customize it to their circumstance. And so it's in draft form. This is not the version that's finalized because as we're working with our partners and we're seeing how they customize it, we're actually learning more and more about what schools are thinking, but then also how this framework shifts once you receive state guidance or district guidance. So what does this framework look like? We're going to take a look at it in a bit, but let me just orient it to you. So we have three phases of work. And the reason we call that out is when we were meeting with our partners, there was this feeling of angst and the unknown was just heavily weighing on them. And we had to really devise thinking around what was under our control right now. So during the months of May, June, July, we're thinking you still have access to the majority of your community. Um, how can we really plan for reentry, thinking about capitalizing on ways for us to get feedback about their experience in ways that can help us, phase two, communicate our reentry plan to families and let them know that it's going to be a better experience, but also think about communicating that plan to the teachers who want training behind a lot of your contingency planning. All that communication is about what are we all collectively norming on and understanding collectively, like what is our shared understanding about reentry, because this is also the season where I implement that plan, because as you see in phase two, it's from August to November. So if I have a brick and mortar return or if I'm on a distance learning model, then I have to make sure that I'm executing that plan during that season and I have close measures to really assess and inspect. The reason I want to make sure I'm inspecting what's happening is that phase three, it talks about thinking in December through April about where the world is in terms of a vaccine, but also what measures have really enhanced your initial reentry plan. How did you improve upon it? The reason why we want to think about those successes and really mitigate the obstacles that we face is that this is a season that we're starting to forward think about recovery. Now, recovery, if you remember about our chapters, that's the season where students and families and and teachers were in a space where we have a vaccine. And so more and more students can return to brick and mortar, knowing that that's readily available. So what kind of things fall under these phases in terms of work? So let's just look at one bucket. I'm calling out one bucket. You'll see that we actually have three named. This leg of work around like instructional support. What does that mean? That means we have to have an instructional model that we've decided that we're going to really pursue. And we have to reflect on previous learning to make it better. We have to determine aspirations. That was something that we were unable to do because we had to rapidly close. But how do our aspirations align with our mission and vision? What is the experience that we actually want our students to engage in, right? Think about aspirations being, I want students to feel cared for, right? That's an aspiration. I want to name that because I want everyone to know that that's our major work. An example of an aspiration that we're not going to pursue is this idea of students on worksheets, right? Or this idea that students stay in review and there's no new learning. How do I actually determine what those aspirations are? Because I know what I'm committed to actualizing, right? There's a lot here. And the one I'm going to call out specifically is teacher training and support. Teachers were integral in us pulling off this plan, but a lot of them didn't have the guidance and training. They were their own coaches. They were their own developers of learning distance formats. Like, we have to think about what do they need to know how to do. And that is actually based on the scenario. How do I want you to operate within the building? And how do I want you to operate when we have to use our distance learning model? And then more importantly, if you're a leader watching this, how do you intend to continuously support your teachers on improving upon your reentry plan, right? With that type of training, when that type of communication plan all worked out because we've had time to reflect, we're going to be able to really think about the roles and responsibilities of everyone who's engaged in this plan. And we're going to make sure that it's better this time. When we think about cultural, that bucket, we have to think about the vulnerable students that were disengaged from a lot of our planning, largely due to access issues, right? But then there's also this need for us to really understand that we just can't use the buzzword of trauma informed. No, this has been a traumatic experience for many people, your staff included. How are you going to keep a close pulse on what everybody needs when they need it? So think about what type of training do I need to engage in for all of my stakeholders? Who are the people who are going to play an important role in keeping this line of work top of mind? But also this idea of engagement. You know, when I think of school culture, I do think about the traditions, the norms. And yes, those are things that we want to make sure are transferable online, that we know how to spread joy and we have key messaging and aligned values and mindsets. That's all important. But this idea of an instructional culture is something that is really going to reign supreme in this season, because right now, how students are experiencing learning is not in any of our aspirations or vision. So thinking about how we want to move past passive engagement and really make sure that students are actively participating in what we're offering at school, whether that be in person or online. The last bucket, again, we had instructional, we had cultural, then there's operational. When I see all of the steps here, the one that always just triggers me is this idea of creating the master calendar and the academic calendar, the master schedule and the academic calendar. So the thing about that is that, you know, I've gone down this rabbit hole with partners who are super happy that we can think about those three scenarios and just say to ourselves, if there's a delayed start, what are we doing? If we actually are going to come back to the building, but it's not all of us, when we're not in the building, what are our students doing? Do I need every teacher to come back into the building? Or how can they manage my virtual school, my online school, right? We want to think about the scenarios just to really think creatively about how to create more access to more customized learning for students, right? That does mean that, you know, that there are budget implications to this. There are vacancies that we have, you know, some teachers may not be returning because of like changed circumstances. But just think about how we used to just take time to create that school list. What does a supply list look like right now? What are we going to equip families and teachers with? What are some things that we need them to continue like thinking of as normed tools and supplies that students need? Food distribution plan, tech audits, all of this comes down to we reacted when we had to close. What were all of the ongoing needs of our students, families, and teachers in terms of tools? But then also just thinking about safety. We were thinking about our vulnerable students while we're in this operational space, because we want to make sure that their access and their feeling of safety to engage in learning is something that doesn't serve as an obstacle. So let me just get out of this for a second to show you what it looks like in draft form. Again, this is on our website. It's going to be available for you all to use. And this is a draft again, because we're not afraid of sharing this with you all, because we've had a lot of partners just say, this is exactly what I needed right now. It's digestible, it's customizable, and it really outlines a major line of work. So just as we went through for each space, we have instructional steps. Again, we're looking at it in terms of our phases. And like there's actually this unspoken cycling of these phases, because right when you get into this April space, you're right back into phase one, thinking about reflecting on learning, determining plans, adjusting plans. Like we're going to re-engage in a lot of phase one work after we reflect during phase three, and really just go through adjustments to ensure that we know which adjustments work. Then I have the cultural steps outlined here in terms of phases of work. I think the big piece here is that we really had to dig deep into this trauma informed practice and really thinking about how social emotional learning lives in our classrooms, whatever format. And then also thinking about an engagement plan. That was something we didn't have time to really lift or surface, but well-being is about being able to track when things aren't well. So engagement is really going to serve as a primary data point for families and students in terms of participating in the models that we've planned for them. And then we have this idea again of the operational steps, right? So when we're thinking about reentry, I think the big piece here is that we can't think about it in traditional ways because the multiple scenarios really are going to inform what we are able to do. And then on top of that, we want to actually just go ahead and start doing that work with the scenarios because as state guidance comes, we actually have collected a lot of trends. We see mostly that there's an expectation of some kind of cycling happening. There's an expectation for us to reconsider developmentally if there's a grade band or a group of students a la high schoolers who are actually just better equipped to engage in distance learning models because there are colleges that are setting that up for students right now, and that's not going to go away. We have a lot to think about. So when I think about looking ahead, it's this question, what do we need to be different? So when you think about current distance learning as it exists, we know that there's some type of wave or some kind of resurgence that we have to be ready for it. That doesn't mean that we're wishing for it. It's this idea of never again. So if we think about having to close again, how are we going to make that reality different for everyone? It has to feel different. It has to have different outcomes, and it has to be wrapped up in a lot of shared understanding and belief in a plan to really serve our students. I also want to add to this whole idea of the framework. Right now in its draft form, we don't have all the tools and templates and resources that are going to be hyperlinked and embedded in some type of workbook format for you all to use, because we also don't want you starting from scratch. So the idea of sample communications, the idea of guidance around your roster creation for classrooms, or just simple ideas related to thinking about structures. Like, what do I do with someone who's non-instructional? How do I think about my special classes? Do I need a wellness team? I never had one before. All of the streams of thinking in terms of instruction, operations, and this idea of culture, the instructional culture. We are really working closely with as many experts as possible to provide all of those resources in a hub that's accessible to you all. So just stay close to a lot of our developments and our work. And on our website, we have contact information that you can share with us if you actually want to partner in this thinking process. But the one thing that has been clear is that leaders cannot re-enter alone. So just make sure you have your reentry team together. Take a look at our hierarchy of needs and think about how you want to tackle each focus area as it relates to reentry. And that framework, we're hoping that's a bit of gold for you. Take care.